So I'd like to introduce our panel. I think everyone has been introduced to Sandy and Peter. But on my far left-hand side, Anthony Feist is from a company called Citrix Systems South Africa. Anthony is a systems engineer and lead systems engineer. And his experience is helping customers understand how technology and business can work together optimally. In the middle, well, kind of in the middle, I got Brian Pinnock from Mimecast. Brian is Regional Manager for Sales Engineering. So I think I'd like to probably ask one of the first questions and see who would really like to sort of pick this up. But Brian, in your space, how would you give a guide to a CIO in prioritizing some transformational initiatives in their organization?
Sure. That's quite a challenge because the CIO is obviously beholden to a number of other C-level executives. So what you've got is your CEO, who's obviously pushing the message around transformation and this kind of mode 2, fast-paced, agile type of thing. But the CIO is also beholden to various other C-level executives. The CFO, most obviously, some organizations is actually a direct reporting line. And typically, always, that's just died. There's a short-term mindset around the way the CFOs thinks about things, and it's normally around revenue and costs. In the short term, you've got people like your risk officer, you've got people like your security officer who may or may not report into the CIO. So the real challenge around transformation, especially when it comes to outsourcing, I think a lot of it was covered there, is just trying to find a way to get some of those agile type approaches into outsourcing. I mean, some of Mimecast's outsourcing partners that have been successful have been able to actually introduce Mimecast as a product into an overall outsourced portfolio. And then as Mimecast, as the security threat landscape, for example, changes, we bring out new products, and they're able to actually introduce those products into the organization in a relatively flexible way. Outsourced partners that haven't got those sorts of contracts in place have struggled to do that. So there's new, the threat landscape's changed. It moved, for example, from 10 years ago, everything was about antivirus, anti-spam, and email security was pretty easy. Now it's moved into all kinds of weaponized attachments and malicious URLs and impersonation protects and CEO impersonation, things like that. And there's new products and new services that come out to address those. And organizations that are able to actually bring in new services relatively easily are able to be successful, and those that are sort of stuck with much more typical legacy type contracts aren't.
Right, thanks. So it's not really about the FUD, is it? It's about getting customers to see through the FUD, and I think you guys are doing a fantastic job of that. Anthony, on your side, what challenges are you seeing in this two-speed world in your engagement with the market and the industry itself?
A really good question, Alex. Us as doing, is it coming through? We've been doing desktop application utilization for a long time, and obviously with desktop outsourcing, the focus is on kind of replacing this kind of typical desktop outsourcing with a outsourced typical desktop outsourcing model. And we're seeing a lot of value in virtualizing applications and desktops and putting them on a server instead of delivering your traditional desktop to end users. And the reason for this is, especially in large corporates, a lot of them have these legacy applications and services that they've developed. The challenge for them is to make these relevant in this mobile world. So, the way we see value being driven into those types of applications is not on a mobile platform, but rather just delivering them as they are on a mobile platform and secure. And really, that's our focus.
So, Claude is an absolute enabler for innovation, and I think many of us have adopted some form of cloud service in probably a public, in secure public, but also in building out our own clouds. You guys, Sandy and you guys have spoken about rapid innovation. How is cloud an enabler for that rapid innovation and maybe you can touch on the DevOps space. You want to pick that up? Sorry.
Yeah, I had an interesting project that I've completed about a year ago where we had to rewrite an entire organization's, it's a call center, debt collecting businesses CRM system, because the current one had reached the end of its life and was actually a threat to the company. And so we didn't have time to go through the traditional way of building an application. They insisted they wanted to do it in-house, in this case, but it could have been outsourced. And what we did there is we went to a DevOps RAD platform, and we built the whole CRM system in 6 months. And actually, the rollout took longer than building of the apps. And to fill and that is changing the way apps are delivered today. You know, where you can keep your legacy apps and surround them with apps that do process better or better at mobile, things like that. You know, Citrix is a good example here, and come out with innovative ideas of delivering the solution for the business. You know, fundamentally, rapid application development is here to stay. And you know, if you put in context of the industry, we're the first time applying automation to the development of applications. You know, hand coding now has got to be archaic, and we need to make that step change. And the biggest threat is probably to the developers themselves, because their whole role will change. So DevOps and RAD are tightly coupled together. And if you want a good RAD platform, then you need to make sure it also supports the DevOps process at the same time. A RAD platform without a DevOps automated process and supported with tools is not going to work. So you need both.
Right, yeah. Thanks. So, you know, Claude provides that agility, and Peter spoke to it at length and shared some of those examples. Brian, from your side, you know, what is the cost of that agility? Can it be done lightly? Is it a rip and replace? And can it be, or could it be incremental?
I think I'm probably going to be slightly contentious here when I talk about agility, because one of the things that cloud provides, and if you think about the difference between a traditional outsourcing company and a cloud-based organization, I'm not going to try and dive into the definition any further than that, is cloud-based organizations like Mimecast, for example, are able to achieve a high level of agility and scalability and all the benefits that we think about from cloud, you know, that sort of elasticity on demand, all of those sorts of things, largely through standardization and scale. And your typical outsource organization doesn't generally have standardization. They tend to customize per client, and they generally don't have scale, except in certain instances where they take certain blocks of services, like take email management, for example, and push it into a Mimecast service or something along those sorts of lines. So I think the real challenge when it comes to finding further and further agility is actually going to be trying to find that balance between standardization. So it may be contentious. I'm not saying standardize absolutely everything. I'm saying standardize within a framework at a service level, and at a configuration level, you can always go into some kind of level of customization. But as soon as you get an organization that decides to do its own version of something, which is actually largely already out there in the market, you immediately lose that ability to do scale. The other thing organizations, client organizations I'm talking about now, typically try and get involved in terms of the choice of vendor. So if you're rolling out certain desktops, for example, they express a preference, or network services, they express a vendor preference. And those vendor preferences come at a cost. They immediately mean that there's an inability to actually achieve scale and an inability to achieve standardization across the board. And that then loses you that high level of agility that you get from a cloud provider. You get a certain other kind of agility there, but I think there's more loss when you have high levels of customization than gain.
I think from Mimecast perspective, as a cloud company, you know, born in the cloud era, started as a cloud company, you're spot on with that. So, Peter, you spoke significantly around this sort of framework, all right? But a practical approach to it. Where would you start in an organization in talking around transformational outsourcing? Who would you start with in the organization?
It's a strategy, and it starts with the business. You're not going to get this transformation going unless the CEO is in on the game. Many organizations, particularly financial services, I was talking to somebody earlier, are massively risk adverse. Will not do anything. The excuse is security, security, security. So you have to first get buy-in from management, and you have to get over that security hurdle and rather go for the why can we do something rather than why can we not. And once you've got that top-down buy-in, it becomes a lot easier. You have to create a vision for IT. What is IT going to look like in 5 years' time? Are we going to own any software, or is it going to be in the cloud? Are we going to own any hardware on any desktop? Why would you? You know, that sort of thing. So once you've got a vision to work towards, and it's not something that stays in the bottom drawer, put it up on the walls and live by it, and get everybody working towards it. But it definitely is a top-down thing, and you need all that support from the top. And once you got that, you can do your roadmaps and all the rest of it and get where you need to be.
All right, thank you. Anthony, from your side, can innovation be accelerated with technology, or does it have to be built from the ground up for it to be innovative?
No, I definitely think technology is pushing innovation. I mean, if you look at it in industries where there wasn't really traditionally a lot of innovation, now a huge amount of innovation. You look at the trucking industry with the Internet of Things, and it's really driving huge efficiencies for the business and allowing them to bring their costs down. So yeah, I think technology is really the key driver for innovation.
So a key message I know from Citrix is you like to be thought of as the last mile in digital transformation. Is there an example you can share that you've experienced previously in your role at a financial institution where that was what was really part of what the organization needed to do?
Yeah, really good question. So, yeah, I mean, for us as a financial services organization was to become more mobile and to be able to deliver our services both inside and outside of the organization. And with technologies like virtualization and mobile device management and perimeter networking, we're able to deliver services that were traditionally kind of only available within the boundaries of the organization out to people in the field. One example is we had a project where we enabled kind of account managers to be able to go out to clients on iPads and not have to redesign the mobile apps and spend money on just to get to all the systems that they need to be able to be productive on the road. Talking to the business requirements, that's the key. You really want to be solving problems for business, and that makes you a valuable partner to business.
Very much an end-to-end discussion, very much end-to-end. So I'd like to extend, we're in the last sort of 7-8 minutes of our Q&A and our panel discussion. I'd like to extend out to the audience any questions that they'd like to pose at this point to anyone on our panel.
Thank you. I've got two questions. One is for Peter. So I work for one of the first-tier banks, for my sins. We're busy with massive change like everyone else, I guess, a lot of talk about digital, DevOps, etc. I think the appreciation of how big a cultural change this is not necessarily there. We have a lot of kingdoms and pockets and a lot of kind of one-man shows all across the bank. I myself work in the software quality management testing space. And as you all know, from a DevOps point of view, the role of testing, quality management, automating earlier, etc., will just increase. So I guess, Peter, my question is how do we, in the pocket that we sit, help influence change across the organization? We are to a large extent victims to the STLC and to the organization. You know, typically in testing we get to do the job right at the end when there's no budget or time left, and that all needs to change. But how do we, in our pocket, help affect change through the organization?
Well, as I said earlier, the most important thing with this sort of thing is a top-down approach. You have to have the support of the leadership. And if you don't have that support of the leadership, it's going to be a huge challenge. Secondly, you need to get education going. Sadly, many people are in these divisions in these big banks just come to work each day and just go home and actually don't care what's going on in the world. They've got their job to do, and that's that. So if you want to get change going, you need to be one of the coaches or educators, spread the gospel fundamentally, and you have to find a leader who will bat for you and support you. I can probably guess which bank you are if you're struggling so much to to change things, but they have to change. And if you start giving stories and case studies about what's going on, even in India, and what people are achieving, and they are very tightly governed like most other banks, and start sharing those stories and say, people are doing this. In the USA they're doing this, Australia they're doing this. Why are we still stuck in the 70s? And start educating and sharing information. It's a slow process, unfortunately, and the quickest way is when a new leader comes in who's seen the light, and it'll change very quickly. But without sharing the vision of what's possible, nothing will change. So you have to start.
You know, Johanna, I think we have a challenge on our side as a technology service provider, is how do we get our customers to understand the perspective we're coming from? And you're right, you know, you're engaging in certain areas and pockets, and everyone's got a different mandate, and that it's about how do you socialize that and elevate it, utilizing this ecosystem of people. And it's not easy, but it's the hard yards that really need to be done. And I think to Sandy's point, to Peter's point, is, you know, it just is about getting the messaging right at the right levels. So good luck with that.
Thank you. Second question to Sandy. So I've been in the vendor space for 22 years, and I've been selling to the bank I'm working for 8 years. And now I work for the bank, and I manage the vendors in testing, 4 of whom are previous employers. But we deal with 17 vendors, which is the first problem in our space. Just gone through an RFI process. EOH was part of that. I would write a book one day about my experience, having been on the sales side all these years, and now I'm procuring. A big part of why we fail with our vendors is the way we deal with the vendors. It's not the vendor's fault. It's almost like we set them up for failure from the very beginning. We manage the vendors in a very kind of arm's length method. We share as little information as possible. We speak about them as our resource providers, which makes me want to fall off my chair, or our body shop providers. You know? We don't procure outcomes. I guess my question to you is, how do I affect change in my organization? So we're about 64 people doing testing in my, well, in a centralized division, and there's another 2,700 elsewhere in the bank doing testing, which is a massive problem. Manual testing mostly. So a lot of my colleagues deal with the vendors from a project point of view, but very little commercial maturity or business acumen. A lot of them have come through the ranks through the years, they're technical specialists, but no idea about how to do business. So I guess is how do we influence change from our point of view to ensure we get the best from the vendors?
That's a hugely complex, and I'm not sure I've got time here, but there's 2 issues you've got there, and in this new world and the role IT is playing, is that the role your team will play is going to change, and they've got to be different types of people now. I believe over time with what's happening here, the testing what you're testing will transform itself, number one, and it'll be outsourced or be automated, Okay, that'll be one issue I think you've got to start dealing with now and looking at. Secondly, you've got to start educating those guys that you've got to start thinking beyond being a technologist now. And, you know, you've got to think like a manager. And every IT guy, you know, the experience I had with this developing the CRM system, what happened there is that I found that I had a team of 10 developers. I had to let 5 of them go because they just couldn't get their head around a different way of doing things. They wanted to code. They wanted to sit in the back and code. They didn't want to go and talk to the end user. They wanted to be given a spec document so that they could sit in their corner and never talk to anybody. And you know, the roles we have traditionally played are going to change, and people, and the message is that those guys have got to change their skill set. They've got to, you know. So I think it's a huge challenge. It's not something that, but I'd love to come and talk to you about it and see if there's, give you some ideas. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Other questions, guys and ladies, from the audience? I'd like to just close off with one question. This is to our Mobcast partner. So we talk about platforms, right? And we talk about platforms in a Uber type economy where they aren't the platform, they are part of this ecosystem. And I absolutely believe, you know, has definitely built a platform. What advice could you give to business to understand that it is a platform and an ecosystem of components and not just one size fits all?
I think the best advice is, I think of it, I mean, a platform is not a bad way of saying it. It is something that resonated with me a while back was at a Gartner conference where Eric Schmidt from Google was on the panel. And somebody said to him, which industry is going to be disrupted next? And he said, I can't actually answer that question. What I can tell you is if software development is not at the heart of what your organization does, you've probably got a problem. And what I think he meant by that was exactly this whole concept of building a platform or a framework. And I can just use Mimecast as an example of that. We do actually have 1 or 2 of our own antivirus engines. We've actually got some patented technology around spam. We don't only use our own technology. We've got about 6 different antivirus engines which we use, and we change them all the time. I've actually lost track in the last few months of which ones that we use. This concept of best of breed is absolutely something that we do. As soon as we find something that's working well, we slot it in and we pull the old one out. Similarly with things like sandboxing technology. So the threat landscape changed. We saw there was a whole lot of malicious attachments that were being sent to users, and we needed to do something about sandboxing. Now we could have built our own sandbox, or we could have just used what we call MIMOS, which is our platform, if you will. So we had our platform, and what we do is we actually pass traffic to a third-party sandbox, which we then manage. If that sandbox doesn't perform well with certain types of attachments, we'll change it out for a sandbox vendor that actually does. So it's that ability it's that combination of your own homegrown platform, your own homegrown operating system, in our case we call it MIMOS, and the ability to slot in different vendor components where needed. And I think that the other part of that is also, you know, being able to talk between your platform and the outside world as well. That's why we put so much effort into APIs. So now it's possible to actually, from our platform, if you're an organization that's really serious about utilizing the value of what's in your email, you could do things like do your employee satisfaction survey just by surveying the sentiment inside your user's email. If you had the kind of capability of doing that just by hooking into the Mimecast API, it's your information, you can use it. And instead of sending out an employee satisfaction survey, for example, you could actually just look at the sentiment analysis of those employees over a period of time. If you've got 10 years worth of email, you've got 10 years worth of mail sentiment. So it's those kinds of things which I think are critical.
Thank you. So it's not about a closed system, and I think for anyone it's to realize that the closed systems are far gone. If you're building a system that's not open and not have the ability to plug into other systems which you aren't that good at developing, you're going to be left behind. So what I'd like to do is, if from Anthony's perspective, if you'd like to engage with Anthony a little bit more on the stand after this, during the course of the day, please do. They're in the booth with Brian and his team. Have a chat to Brian, if not after, at his stand. And to Sandy and Peter, thank you guys so much for your time. And to our audience, thank you for your support.